The sun dipped low over Sacramento, painting the sky in warm hues of amber and gold. It had been a long day, and Eric Porter was ready to leave it behind. His sedan glided quietly through the streets as the gentle hum of the engine blended with soft music on the radio, a soothing soundtrack to his winding drive home. With one hand adjusting the air conditioning, Eric exhaled, letting the tension of the workday slowly melt away. As he approached an intersection, the traffic light flickered from yellow to red. He slowed to a stop, maybe not a full stop, but enough, or so he thought. Suddenly, red and blue lights flared in his rearview mirror, followed by the sharp wail of a police siren. Eric's brow furrowed. He pulled calmly to the side of the road, rolled down his window and waited. From the patrol car behind him, Officer Bradley Larson stepped out. Mid-30s, buzz cut, shoulders squared. He walked with the quiet confidence of someone who expected compliance. His badge gleamed in the fading sunlight. "License and registration," Larson said, his tone flat but edged with authority. Without a word, Eric reached into his glove compartment, handing over the requested documents with composed precision. But even in that silence, he could feel the weight of Larson's gaze, searching, judging, expecting something. "You know why I pulled you over?" the officer asked, leaning closer. "I'm not entirely sure," Eric replied, polite but unshaken. "You didn't come to a full stop at the light," Larson said, though he hesitated as if unsure of his own claim. Eric nodded slightly. "I thought I slowed down enough, but I understand." Larson didn't respond right away. His eyes lingered on Eric, something shifting in his demeanor. What had started as a simple stop was transforming into something else, something more calculated. He glanced at the license again. "You're not from around here, are you?" Eric paused for a moment. "Moved here a few months ago. The address is on the license." But Larson wasn't listening. Not really. His questions had taken a turn. Less about traffic law, more about control. There was a tension now, subtle but undeniable, and Eric could feel it tightening like a wire. "Where were you headed in such a hurry?" Larson asked. "Just going home." Still calm, still firm, but the air had shifted. Larson no longer saw Eric as just another driver. He saw something else, something undefined but suspicious in his mind. Eric could sense it, the shift, the suspicion, the silent escalation. What Larson didn't realize was that Eric's calm wasn't naivete. It was restraint, composure, control. The officer took a step back, slowly folding the documents before tucking them into his chest pocket. His expression changed, smug, almost as if he'd already made a decision. "Step out of the car," he ordered. Eric's hands gripped the steering wheel for a beat longer than necessary. Then, without a word, he opened the door and stepped out. He was slightly taller than the officer, his tailored suit neat, his posture collected. Everything about him radiated professionalism, but none of it seemed to matter. Larson gestured toward the hood. "Hands where I can see them." Eric complied with quiet precision. "Is there something specific you're looking for, officer?" Larson offered a faint smirk. "Just routine. We've had some incidents in the area. You can never be too careful." "Incidents involving men in business suits driving home from work?" Eric asked, turning his head slightly to meet the officer's eyes. "Or does this have more to do with something else?" The question landed like a stone in still water. Larson's expression hardened. His hand instinctively drifted toward his belt. "Watch your tone." "I'm simply asking for clarity," Eric replied. "Transparency. That's not too much to expect." Larson scoffed but didn't answer. He began pacing, circling in front of the car, unsettled. Eric wasn't responding the way most people would. There was no fear, no nervousness, no cracks in his voice, just a poised, quiet strength. "You seem pretty confident," Larson muttered, almost to himself. "Like you know how this ends." Eric didn't bite. "It's not about confidence. It's about respect." That stopped Larson for a moment. The smirk faded. His jaw tightened. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but nothing came out. This wasn't how things usually went. The control Larson typically wielded was slipping. And Eric? He stood firm, steady as stone. Frustration simmered beneath Larson's surface. His fingers tapped lightly against his holstered belt, eyes scanning the car for a reason, any reason, to justify the direction things were heading. Turn around, he said finally, his voice sharp. Hands on the hood. The real test had just begun. I need to check for weapons, Officer Larson said. Eric raised an eyebrow, disbelief flickering across his face. Weapons? He repeated, the word laced with calm incredulity. Do I look like someone carrying a weapon? Larson's jaw tensed, his grip on control, already slipping, tightened with effort. I'm not going to ask you again. For a moment, Eric didn't move. A flicker of something unreadable crossed his face. Then, without a word, he turned and placed his palms flat on the hood of his car. The crunch of Larson's boots on the pavement broke the silence like a warning shot. He patted Eric down, quickly, roughly. His hands lingered longer than necessary. This wasn't a search for weapons. It was a display, a challenge, a test. But Eric didn't flinch. He didn't squirm. He stood still, composed, centered, unbothered. You're clean, Larson muttered, stepping back. The words felt more like a defeat than a relief. Eric turned slowly, meeting the officer's gaze. His face remained neutral, but there was steel in his eyes. Of course I am, he said quietly. Now, officer, if you're done. I'm not done, Larson snapped. The frustration in his voice was barely hidden now. You seem to know a lot about what I can and can't do. Care to explain why? Eric folded his arms, his posture loose despite the tension crackling in the air. I've had my share of encounters with law enforcement, he replied. Let's just say, I've learned a few things over the years. Larson squinted, suspicion narrowing his gaze. That's so. You a lawyer or something? Eric offered a faint smile. Or something. The ambiguity rubbed Larson the wrong way. He stepped closer, entering Eric's space, his voice dropping to a low growl. You think you're smarter than me? Think you can talk your way out of this? Eric didn't blink. I don't think anything, officer. I just believe in fairness. And frankly, I haven't seen much of it here tonight. The words landed like a challenge, and Larson took the bait. Fairness? He sneered. You think that's what this is about? People like you always… He stopped himself. Too late. Eric didn't move, but something in his presence shifted, a quiet power rising to the surface. People like me? He repeated, voice soft but cutting. Larson backed off, visibly flustered. You know what I meant. I think I do, Eric replied, cool and razor-sharp. His calmness wasn't passive anymore. It was purposeful. And I think we both know this stopped being about a traffic violation a long time ago. For the first time, Larson looked unsure of himself. The balance of power was shifting, and fast. Then came the moment that would define it all. Eric's voice cut through the heavy silence, steady and unflinching. Officer, I think it's time you knew who I am. Larson's eyes narrowed. His irritation flared again. I don't care who you are, he shot back, though the crack in his voice betrayed a different truth. Eric reached into his inside pocket, slowly, deliberately. I'm reaching for my badge, he said calmly, noting how Larson's hand twitched near his holster. No need for dramatics, just take a look. Larson watched as Eric pulled out a slim leather wallet and flipped it open. The badge inside gleamed in the fading sunlight. Eric Porter, he said, his voice calm, head of internal affairs, Sacramento Division. Larson froze. His eyes darted from the badge to Eric's face, searching for a lie, a trick, anything. But Eric's expression held no games, only quiet authority and a hint of disappointment. Internal affairs? Larson whispered, the words catching in his throat. Yes, Eric said, cutting off the question before it could form. I investigate officers. Officers like you. Larson staggered back a step, as if the truth had weight. His hand dropped away from his belt, the badge on his own chest suddenly feeling heavier than ever. Eric took a slow step forward, closing the distance Larson had instinctively created. Do you know what's most troubling about this interaction, Officer Larson? He asked. Larson said nothing. He looked like a man realizing the floor beneath him had just disappeared. It's not the profiling, though that's bad enough. Not even the pointless escalation, Eric continued, his voice steady, sharp. It's that you went through this whole performance without even knowing who you were dealing with. He let the words sink in. You assumed I wouldn't know my rights, that I wouldn't understand the laws you're sworn to uphold, and why? Eric's voice dropped slightly, every word deliberate. Larson opened his mouth, but no sound came. Eric didn't need the answer. Because I didn't fit your idea of someone worthy of respect. That hit hard. Eric's words weren't loud, but they carried the weight of a closing verdict. And that's not just a problem for me, officer. That's a problem for every person you encounter in that uniform. Larson's shoulders sagged under the pressure of the truth. His confident mask had slipped completely. All that remained was a man caught in his own reflection. Eric stepped back, giving the officers space to absorb it all. Here's what's going to happen, he said. You're going to return my documents. Then you're going to think very carefully about what you say next. Larson hesitated. He wanted to speak, to push back, but he knew better now. Eric added, voice low, you're going to hear from me again, not as the man you stopped on the side of the road, but as the one who determines whether you still deserve that badge. Larson's face went pale. With trembling fingers, he pulled Eric's license and registration from his chest pocket and handed them over. Eric took them silently, tucked them into his wallet, and walked to the driver's side door. Just before getting in, he paused, turning back one last time. Remember this, Officer Larson, he said. The badge doesn't make you better than anyone else. It makes you accountable to everyone. As Eric slid behind the wheel and started the engine, Larson stood frozen in the golden hour light. His confidence shattered, his future uncertain. For Eric, this wasn't over. Not even close. The next steps he took would ripple far beyond a single roadside encounter. They'd strike at the roots of a system that had allowed officers like Larson to operate unchecked for far too long. The drive home was silent, but Eric's thoughts were anything but still. The scene replayed over and over in his mind, not because it was rare, but because it was routine. Larson wasn't the first officer to let bias guide his actions, and Eric knew, with chilling certainty, he wouldn't be the last. But this time, Eric had something he didn't before, the authority to act. The next morning, sunlight slanted through the blinds of Eric's office at the Sacramento Police Department's Internal Affairs Division. A thin file lay open on his desk. Officer Bradley Larson. The contents were telling, minor complaints, repeated patterns, stops that raised eyebrows but never alarms, until now. Eric leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. Larson wasn't an outlier. He was a symptom, a sign of deeper fractures within the department. And Eric wasn't interested in quick fixes or hollow apologies. Not anymore. A knock interrupted his thoughts. His assistant, Linda, stepped in with a stack of reports. Morning, Mr. Porter. I've got the misconduct summaries from last month. Also, Chief Daniels wanted to remind you about next week's department review. Eric nodded, taking the documents. Thanks, Linda. Can you also schedule a meeting with the chief for this afternoon? There's something we need to talk about. She paused, sensing the gravity in his voice. Of course, she said softly, then slipped out. Eric turned back to the file, but his focus had shifted. This wasn't about Larson anymore. This was about the culture that gave him cover, the quiet nods, the look the other way attitude, the unwritten rule book no one dared rewrite. That was about to change. That afternoon, Eric sat across from Chief Daniels in a glass-walled conference room. Daniels was a seasoned cop, grizzled, sharp-eyed, and respected. He listened quietly as Eric recounted the traffic stop in detail. I could have walked away, Eric said, his voice calm but unwavering, written it off as a bad interaction, but that would have been a mistake. Daniels exhaled, rubbing his temples. This isn't the first time Larson's name has come up, he admitted, but we've always handled it internally, quietly. Eric met his gaze. And that's the problem. Quiet doesn't fix it. Quiet lets it keep happening. It's time to stop whispering and start confronting this out loud. Daniels leaned forward, eyes narrowing slightly. What exactly are you proposing? A department-wide review, Eric said without hesitation. Not just of individuals, but of how we train, how we supervise, how we hold each other accountable. If we don't raise our own standards, we have no right asking the public to trust us. Daniel sat back, silent for a moment. Then, you know this is going to ruffle feathers. Eric didn't flinch. Good. It's about time someone did. What followed was a whirlwind. Weeks of strategy sessions, interviews, policy audits, and public forums. Eric worked tirelessly, not to tear the department down, but to rebuild it from the inside out. The Larson incident became a flashpoint, a rallying cry, a case study in how even a single moment of unchecked power could damage the fabric of trust. Larson was brought before an internal review board. Eric sat across from him during the hearing, watching the officer shift under the scrutiny he once so casually inflicted on others. The result, a suspension. But Eric wasn't interested in punishment for punishment's sake. The real victory wasn't in silencing Larson. It was in making sure there wouldn't be another Larson. Months later, Eric stood at a podium during a community event, facing a crowd that included officers, city leaders, and everyday citizens. He didn't speak of blame. He spoke of responsibility. He didn't stir anger. He stirred resolve. Justice, Eric said, his voice echoing through the room, isn't just about catching bad actors. It's about ensuring those who wear the badge do so with integrity, fairness, and respect for everyone they serve. His words weren't a conclusion. They were a promise. And the applause that followed wasn't for what had been done. It was for what was possible. As Eric stepped down from the stage, he scanned the room. Some faces were skeptical, some hopeful, but all of them were listening. He knew real change wouldn't happen overnight, but it had started. And for now, that was enough. If this story moved you, share it. Let's start conversations that matter. Conversations that challenge, inspire, and remind us what we're capable of when we choose to stand for what's right. Subscribe for more stories like this, stories that spark change.